Group 1 can be there, Group 2 here, and Group 3 here. This is 10 years and more. This is 2 to 10 years, and that's less than 2 years.
Dear friends, basically I'm not into NGOs, I'm a professor at a university. It is for the first time I had an interaction with a group sitting on your extreme left. We were given assignment to find out the scaling, whether should we go for scaling or should we not go for scaling. We have worked out on our goals. Laid downs are that we would like to take out, come to the market, we do scaling because we would like to take the benefits which we have come out with research. We want to take these benefits to the masses at larger scale in the country and the world, so that whatever innovations we have come out, whatever product we have come out, that should go to the extreme masses in the country so that they can be benefited by this, so that at large level people are benefited and people are healthy in the country. Second goal was that we will be making more money by selling our product, and the third was that we would be branding and having a reputation in the country, and fourth was that we would secure future for our product. Now the threats, why should we not do it? That was, we discussed that why should we not do it, and there we have said that it will be difficult for us to maintain quality standards. That is one threat, limitations, risk. We have taken a threat in terms of feasibility, whether we will be having the raw material available for us for another 50 years or not, and whether we will have trained people with us to carry out the project or not. The third risk factor was infrastructure, because once we launch our product, how much infrastructure will be required, and support from the government, whether it will be available or not available. Fourth one was funding, and the very important risk factor is people mindset changes from time to time. The product we are launching today, it may not be effective maybe after 10 years. And the next one was partners with and through. Normally when you are working with a small company, you are better person, you can bring quality, but when you enlarge your product, then probably you work with through partners, and your partners may not have the same objective and same brain mindset as you have. So that is one of our risk factor. And the last one was resources in future, that I have already added. These were the risk factors we have identified. Now how are we going to do it? We would involve stakeholders. We will be promoting growth of individuals who are involved with our business, and we will be monitoring and planning for future, and we will have schooling, training for school children and college regarding the product we are taking up. This is how we are going to do it. Thank you.
So there's a lot of, you could argue there's a reputation risk, although there's not much of a reputation yet, but it could be a long-term reputation risk. There could be a lot of loss of money at the end of the day, because you're doing it for the first time, and though you get a huge amount of money from the government, maybe you don't know how to spend it, maybe you don't know who to talk to, so you could at the end of the day you could lose a lot of money as well. Maybe you don't want to be associated with the government or with a project of such a high risk in general. So those are the reasons why not to do it. Why we said we want to do it is because you might want to start a large company, and this might be the initial Kickstarter. You could go into the history books, you could be a game changer, you could change the shape of the landscaping industry, so to speak. Could be highly profitable if you do it right. That's what I hear about government contracts at least. And maybe you feel that, even if you don't do it that well, maybe not everybody will be so concerned about it at the end of the day. It's just the landscaping. So, so those are the reasons. Maybe I can. So actually, as we were talking about it, it started to sound actually like quite a tough project, because you're just starting into something, and there's a lot of management that's critical around this. The design is just the early phase. So initially, what you would do is that you would research and do a needs assessment and understand what is happening, talk to all the stakeholders, who's involved in what, and you basically get an idea of what you need to deliver on. And then you start your design. And to do your design, you might need to bring in some expertise because you have never done it before. So you might be great at certain parts of it, not at everything. So we said we'll probably bring in, even at the early stage, some consultants. Could be around what we said is environmental impact studies and other elements that are critical. So you would probably bring some consultants on board that have advised in the past or worked in the past with similar projects. This is where basically we would ourselves be, the game changer in the regular design of the landscaping. That's where we add our value. And then as we started talking about the planning stage, which is so overwhelming actually, come to think of it, with so many aspects ranging from, who's going to do the financial accounting. I'm a designer, so I probably don't want to deal even with that. Architects is something we could manage on our own. But then there's the hiring of the labor, there's the incentivizing of the labor, there's the management, there's the whole project managing in general, because there's so many aspects to such a large project, and all the other stakeholders. You have to do the quantity surveying, the costing, the risk management. You can go on and on. You would be almost foolish to do this on your own, and you probably hire a lot of consultants or somebody that can actually do all of that for you. So at the end of the day, I mean, what I conclude from this is that actually, if it was me, I probably would have done it, but I would have brought on some good partners and consultants and focused on my core component, my core expertise, which is design, and then learn a lot from it, and it would be a great boost to a good career.
Our situation is that we've been granted a catering project to 1,000 people, but we've never done a project as big. But what we are good at is we really know how to cook. So that's the reason someone's offering us to to cater to 1,000 people. So our challenges that we have to assess now is whether we want to do the project or not. Because we've never catered to 1,000 people. 1,000 people are a lot of people. But we are well known for our cooking, because we just cook. We have a product to offer. So the first thing that we were doing is the risk analysis. What's required? Do we have the infrastructure to cook? For 1,000 people. We just cook. We've never done such a big catering gig. But do we have the infrastructure? The second, under infrastructure, you'll have to be talking of the manpower, and how soon do you need to do it? If you'll be able to gather a team that will be able to cook for 1,000 people, because we have a product, we know how to cook, but will you be able to replicate it for 1,000 people? There's always this big problem of capital. You have to raise the capital if you've got to cook for 1,000 people. If you really want to do it, if you're going to be catering to 1,000 people, then 1,000 different people know of your product. So you're going to be gaining recognition. That's one reason that we possibly may go ahead and cater. Now that you've analyzed your risk, after you've analyzed your risk, it is the feasibility. Do you have it in you to implement, distribute food for 1,000 people? Because just producing it is not enough. You should be able to deliver your product. If you produce your product very well, but you're not able to deliver it, your product's good for nothing. Out of the 1,000 people, you're going to be getting more negativity out of, or rather than positivity, where you're going to be catering to 1,000 people. That is doing that, for someone like me, it will be once in a lifetime. It is the big break sort of project. The next thing is, after you have been able to cater, will you be able to go ahead and do the post production? You'll have to make sure that the waste management is right. If you'll be able to, once you've eaten, you need to have proper access to your toiletries and things like that. So those are certain other things that you need to be taking into consideration when you're going to be catering. So ultimately, we possibly would take the gig and do it if we have a good timeline. If the project is feasible, if we are able to gather a team on such a scale, then definitely we will do it. I hope my team agrees with me.
So what are the steps that you would, if no one has a question, if I can?
Yeah, sure.
What are the steps that you would take to make sure that you're catering to the project?
Like I said, first we are going to be assessing our infrastructure. Do we have that kind of infrastructure? If you're not able to provide that kind of infrastructure, then you have to hire your infrastructure. If you've got to hire, then it needs extra capital, right? You need to have that is groceries to be able to cook. So that is the second part. If you've got the groceries and if you are able to cook, then you need the manpower to distribute it or even produce it for that matter. Finally, how soon do you need to be able to put together the entire team to be working? So any questions?
Which type of risk you are analysis first? Risk analysis.
Yeah.
Infrastructure and
Yeah. First, we are actually we are checking the feasibility if it is a possibility, because we know how to cook. That's our strength. If we are able to deliver, that's our challenge. And like Saurabh said, 70% of the companies who start, they don't know they're doing new things. So let's do something new.
Any more questions for them?
Just one thing, with scaling up, it's always the issue of maintaining your quality.
Right.
You can cook good food,
Right.
but then can you cook 100 liters of dal and can you put the salt same? So you have to
Correct.
just put that.
Correct. So make me the supervisor. I'll guide you. I'll tell you what to do.
Yeah.
And you do it.
If you consider to add the logistics, the delivery part of it, you increase the complexity.
Correct.
So another strategy could be that you just scale what you exactly already can do, which is the cooking,
Right.
and just forget about the delivery part and let
Outsource.
So
have someone done.
you're being typically German. You're talking of outsourcing right now.
But
cook, and let them distribute. No, but these are challenges that we would not risk people to because we're doing it. It's once in a lifetime project. I wouldn't outsource this project to anyone. I would make sure that I deliver so that I get another 1,000 people to get, because this is something that I'm doing so that I get more offers. That's the reason I really want to do
deliver
it.
them on time.
It's yeah.
This
It
is,
has-
I'm thinking of my tiffin service. The food is delicious, but
Yes.
it's not on time.
Right.
And then that makes you want to go to someone else.
Absolutely.
They take on more than they can chew.
We've said the last thing is it feasible? Because if you're going to 1,000 people, it could be at a venue, it could be 1,000 different people at different points. So if it is feasible, then yes, why not?
The willingness to take a risk, the willingness of knowing that things can go wrong and yet willing to take the plunge and address a problem. Criticizing your own work, being aware that maybe you can go wrong in the way and willing to address it also, and being prepared to fail. That's a given. You should be prepared to fail. Don't obviously plan for success, but be prepared to fail as well. Create the systems that mitigate that risk at the beginning itself. The model that we use, right? The model, when we want to scale up, the model has to be cost effective. We cannot, when we are small, and remember that if we are large organizations, we are not scaling up. We have already scaled up. Remember that we are small today, right? And we want to scale up. We don't have the resources. That's a given. We don't have the resources. manpower wise or money wise, we don't have these resources. But we want to scale up, right? So we have to do something that's most cost effective. That's something that can reach out to the audience at the least cost and at least cost to us as well, right? It has to be, the model has to be proven, it has to be research based. People should understand that this has the opportunity or the impact that you are saying it has, right? The people why will the people believe you? You know, you're saying, oh, I have a great product, but only you saying is not going to make a difference. So someone else has to tell the audience or your customers or the people that we work with or our target group as we call them, that your model works, right? If I tell the child that you should wash hands, but if I go and tell the parent that washing hands 4 times a day decreases the incidence of diarrhea by 10% or 20% or 50%, and it's a research that different companies have carried out or different agencies have carried out, that gives much higher validation to the plan that I have, right? And the model that I'm using must be relevant to a larger audience. It should not be a product, it should not be something that is not relevant. It should also be adaptable. It should change with the scenarios. You know, like sometimes you need to tweak a product. You can't say that, okay, this is it and I have it in English and you implement it in Odisha or in Indonesia or somewhere where they don't understand English, right? So the opportunity to adapt, to change differently, you know, changing the model, tweaking the model, the language, the design, the structure, based on the needs of the people should exist at the very beginning itself. And you should understand that some things will change. The quality issues that you spoke about. You have to prepare at the very beginning knowing that the quality will be different. It may not be worse than what you did, but it will be different because the medium that you're using, the partnerships that you're using, they're going to be very different. The areas you store your product are going to be different. So you have to be willing to change what you have to be adaptable to different audiences. The scope of innovation to modify, to change as required by that community itself. So that should also exist. You know, if I say that this is my product and I'm very strong in saying that this is how it is going to go to the community, it's bound to fail because it will not be relevant in terms of language, in terms of structure. In the model, you know, before we get the model out, we have to remember when we scale up, the stakeholders are going to be large. From being the sole implementer, designer, creator, there are hundreds of people who become a part of your program. So, you know, like we all know how communications can fail, how things can go wrong, how something that's perishable can land up somewhere without electricity and perish, right? So, knowing that a lot of things are going to go wrong and preparing the standard operating processes, you know, like when we talk about a model, having the right curriculum design, a right program design, standardizing curriculum, having the right monitoring and evaluation systems, creating processes by which you are able to monitor the different processes involved in bringing your program to another audience. A child protection policy, you have an amazing child protection policy and you are the implementer, you know it all. But now there is your partner who is a partner who is going to implement that child protection policy. And you know, it's in English. So how do we make sure that that person also understands? So creating a process, who will translate, who will validate, how will the processes be friendly to that audience? All these things have to be pre-done before we scale up. Right? The money required. This is key. You know, we need money, we need capital, be it NGOs, be it a business, we need a lot of money to scale up when we are going, you know, like we're going to reach out to a larger audience. So, you know, thinking at the very beginning of alternative sources, because we are NGOs, we have talked about donations, you know, not be dependent only on donations. When you scale up, you have to remember that you have to plan and you have to have a commitment to get the funds from somewhere before you scale up. You can't scale up, hire hundreds of people and then not give them the salary or still ask them to leave. Or, you know, make a product and then leave it in the, you know, wasting in the godowns or somewhere. Because it's an end-to-end commitment. After you take the risk, if you quit, you're gone, right? Like you're gone in every week. But being prepared at the very beginning that you have to be dependent not only on donations but on different ways on how you can raise funds. You can make your stakeholders the people who create the money for your scale up, which is one of the most sustainable models, you know, where your participants become the contributors to your scale up plan, where they buy your product in some way, right? Like you're not selling it, but they become stakeholders in a different way where they're taking some cost off you, or you have different partners in the funding fraternity itself whose goals are met through your product in a way, and you already have a commitment and know that someone is going to be there to catch you when you fall for the next 3 years while you're scaling up. And it's a huge, huge investment to make, right? You have to remember that you always need to keep a buffer money with you, a money that's going to help you through the hard times, and these times are going to be there while you're scaling up, right? And you're going from a very small to a large organization in a short period of time, so you need to keep that buffer money with you before you scale up. Setting up transparency measures, accountability measures, because from being the person who is handling everything, you are actually giving power away to different people. And you have to create systems so that everyone follows what you have been following till date. So that's the next step to take before scaling up. Having this standard operating processes in managing finances before you scale up again. Manpower. Okay, this is very critical as well. In all the groups that we discussed, we know that if we are the one person implementing it and we know it all, it's great. But when you scale up, you're actually taking the risk to give up the power. You have to be willing to give the power up and have different power structures within your organization. Be willing to divide the roles. Be willing to be open to innovation that the other people bring in. And when you're scaling up, you have to remember that you are not looking for managers then. You're looking for leaders, people who have done well in their sectors, people who have been leaders. Only these people can help you build a stronger organization. When you're scaling up, managers will not work. You need people who have led large teams, who have led different organizations, who have worked in structures, who have dealt with processes. And when Prateek shares the Magic Bus story, he will tell you how we have scaled up in the last 15 years. And having the ability to balance the right kind of talent, right type of talent, as Saija was sharing in his team. He's a great architect, but he does not know how to get the right people, or make sure that the landscape designing of the where to get the raw materials from, because that's not his core competency. So hiring the right set of people whose core competency is in different roles that we have while scaling up in the organization. Material of, as we've all discussed this, so I'm not going to go deep into it, where to source it from, how to make it cost effective, maintaining relationships between the vendor, creating processes for procurement, storage, managing the products that we have. And this is again within the program that we have itself. Like everyone has a different material that we use, soft material or a natural material, right? So how do we do the procurements, how do we store it? All these processes have to be thought about even before we scale up. Managing, we need great managers, we need great leaders to manage all the four above, the models, the manpower, the materials, having the standard processes, creating external partnerships, going out to new markets, doing researches. All these are a part of our work when we scale up. So, questions? Before we go ahead and share our Magic Bus story, if you have any questions. First question from me, would you scale up?
Generally, based on some of the experiences we had, we definitely want to scale up. But at what point of time do we do a reality check that, our model is not working fine or the product is not relevant? We can, of course, learn and then go back and then come back stronger. So is there a point of time in the evolution that you feel that you've scaled up a little faster before you could have, taken some little more time? Is there a thought on that side?
So that's again a risk you take, and you never stop evaluating. That's a given. You evaluate before you scale up, you evaluate while you scale up, and you evaluate after. Because even if your product remains the same, the context keeps changing, the people keep changing. So you have to evaluate and evaluate again depending on the context and the designs, right? So that never stops. But it's a risk you take at any point, right? A 1-year organization can scale up, a 10-year-old organization can scale up. Everyone said that they would scale up, right? So it's not dependent on the age group, it's dependent on the intent, right? And so you have to take that risk, evaluate your product at that point, and then scale up and keep evaluating it through its life cycle.
no harm in kind of, going back and feel that,
Yeah, you can. So you can take a smaller risk, scale up in a phase, not go from 0 to 100 in one day, but you go 0, 3, 5, 10, and then you scale up. You decide on your own strengths, what you have, and then you decide the speed of your scale up as well.
And in addition, what would work is perhaps to do even a pilot for that scaling model. So you can lower your risks, of course, by doing this, and then make based on the pilots and then the outcomes, and again tune your scaling model to that extent, and then go the next step. So I personally think that's the only reasonable way to go forward, to really do a limited pilot and then take it.
So actually, I don't want to make it more of a magic bar story, and I'm kind of loath doing this every time. So I'll try to make it as generic as possible and as relevant to all concerned, because the idea is not to kind of present something like a rosy picture, and because that's not, one size does not fit all. And you talk about an extreme example of a complete startup where you're the only person who's convinced about your product and nobody else around you is convinced. So how do you start off from that to an example of a magic bus which does have a bit of a legacy, and then of course, because then we're talking about exponential growth. So scale up itself is a very relative term. So what are you calling scale up? I can be in a S4D organization with 2 coaches, and I want to go to 10 coaches, and I can call it a scale up. And I can be, in case of Magic Bus, when I joined Magic Bus, we were about 80-90 people. And a few thousand children. Today we're at 250,000 with 700 staff and so on. So that's another scale up altogether. So there are different dimensions of what you call scale up, but a lot of generic principles apply across the board. And I think one of the first things that I thought was going to get left out, but I didn't want to get into the discussion then, is the conviction in your model. If whoever is kind of pushing that button, whoever is kind of driving that whole machine, and it can take any shape, the animal can grow as big as it can. But if the conviction behind the base module, the base model, is not there, and something that you do not believe in, you're kind of iffy about it, and you don't want to push it, and you want to see, okay, let's see what happens, and then based on what really happens, I'll then decide whether to scale up or not scale up. Now these are very dangerous situations, and that is where a reasonably proven model, and I emphasize on the word reasonably proven, because especially in the social sector, there is never a proven model. It can never be. So in fact, in the Magic Bus evolution story, the vision mission statements of Magic Bus in '99 is so different from the vision mission in 2004, very different in 7, very different in 12, because the organization has been organic. And I believe that's how life is, and that's how social sector behavior changes happen. It's never about that point of time in life that this is what I want, and this is always what I'm going to want for the next decade and a half. That's never going to be the case. Which means it has to be very organic, it has to be very inclusive, it has to be open to challenges, it has to be open to accepting that, yes, I did wrong, here's a better way, go grab it. Here's a partner I picked up, I messed it up, I'll find a better one. I'll learn from my mistake. Be humble about learning from mistakes. Be humble about accepting that this has not worked. This is where we wanted to go. Be humble about saying that I don't know, you tell me, we'll figure it out, let's go on the journey. But yes, more or less you have to be certain that this is the path to be taken. So the framework has to be there. The nuts and bolts can come and go as and when opportunities arise. So just to take off on that question of yours, you will have to find your first partner. Otherwise, you're not doing your job properly. So if your heart truly lies in a product that you believe does make a difference, you will find somebody who supports you. Otherwise, you're either not selling it properly, or there's something lacking where you think you're very convinced, but somebody else is not getting convinced. So somewhere maybe it's a matter of presentation style, it's a matter of networking, it's a matter of just pushing the wrong button, whatever it could be. But the fact is, at least you should start with a sphere of influence, and it can't just be you. And if you can't even influence around you, well, it's a very difficult thing then. You need to start off somewhere, and then possibly it will snowball into something bigger. So I will not go into the presentation, again in the interest of time, because this room has to be converted into a rock and roll area in the next 2-3 hours, and the bands need some practice time here. So I've been told that I have just about 15-20 minutes.
But what I would encourage you is to ask me questions, and I'll just give you a 5-minute snapshot of how it went, how we went about doing stuff. And again, in all humility, not to sound pompous here, it is a struggle. It is not an easy thing. So what you hear about Magic Bus today, and we feel proud about us being quoted, has not been a bed of roses. The kind of struggles I had to go through when coming to the organization, and I'll just allude to that for 2 minutes. The biggest struggle I had to go through when I came in the end of 2009 into Magic Bus, and when I was told that, okay, here's your chance to take 3,000 children that we are currently, to take it to 1 million children in the next 5 years. Are you up for it? And I said yes. I studied Magic Bus for 3 months before joining it to understand, do I have a product that can actually deliver this? And I was from a completely traditional sector. I had worked in HRD ministry, I had worked in health ministry, I had worked in the UN. Completely traditional way of operating. You can imagine what the bureaucracy is like in most places. The UN is an even bigger bureaucracy. You will never learn anything there. My pardon if anybody's from the UN here. But I've been it all, I've been there, I've seen it all. It doesn't give you much. What you get from on the ground, by meeting people, by touching people, by feeling people, getting to know their challenges, their passions, their commitment. Unless you touch and feel that, you never get the true flavor of it. But anyway, coming to Magic Bus again. So what was happening was, I had a struggle in trying to convince a whole bunch of people in Magic Bus that, look, there's a different way this product, this animal of yours can be tamed to address many, many more millions and thousands. Now, in order to do so, we obviously cannot do it exactly the way we've been doing in Mumbai for the last 10 years. It has to be done differently. So let's define what is our core DNA. What do we do really? And then we'll do it in a way which is scalable, which is replicable, which is cost effective. If you don't tick these 3 boxes, you can never ever scale. You have a product which is scalable, replicable, and finally cost effective. Because if you have a product which is costing a bomb, you will be thrown out the window in no time. So what's the point? If you don't tick these 3 boxes, it's not happening. So it was all about studying the Magic Bus product. What was it? I was using sport. I was using mentoring as an approach. So in fact, when I come into Magic Bus, we always had paid staff delivering programs. So the mentors were paid staff. So I came up with a model that we'll have volunteers on ground. And what gave me the confidence that we can have volunteers on ground is the fact that we use sport. We're giving something to the volunteers who they would love to do for years together, which is play, which is have fun. Now, where else do we need to have volunteers in the social sector who can actually have fun? Because I've seen health programs and education programs being run by volunteers. They're interested in it for 6 months, 3 months, 4 months. After that, they get bored. They're dead tired. There's hardly any passion left in them. But possibly in the sphere of sport, because you do something that you really enjoy doing, you might continue to do it for a longer period of time. And that's how the whole concept of a community youth leader started in Magic Bus. So it was understanding the product and then seeing that can we take the product to another level. So my internal fight in Magic Bus was all about how can we have volunteers deliver it? Aren't we compromising on quality if you do so? And my answer was yes, we are compromising on quality. But it's the same question. Do you want a medical institution like the All India Medical Sciences operating in 500 places? Or we need 5,000 public health centers? There will obviously be a quality gap. But if you're conscious, if your parameters are well settled, and you tell the world that, look, I'm not delivering that quality, but I think that there are millions out there who definitely demand this much or deserve this much, and I'm willing to give you that, I can stand up to any scrutiny. Because I've defined my parameters based on what my bandwidth could be, based on the product that I have, and I'm completely transparent about it. I know I'm not delivering AIMS. I'm only delivering PHCs, public health centers, but I'm very, very conscious of it, and I'm telling the world in as many words. I'm not delivering FIFA A-class certified coaches trainings here. I'm delivering very, very grassroots level, volunteer-led training programs. And if I'm very transparent about that, more often than not, you're not going to be challenged that, okay, why aren't your kids going in, competing in state tournaments and international tournaments? Why is India ranked 161 in the FIFA rankings? Nobody's questioning me on that. I don't have to answer that because I've defined my parameters as such. And I think this is the biggest mistake a lot of us do in terms of scaling up. We kind of set the benchmark high uniformly across the board, irrespective of what else we want to achieve. And the moment we get into a one-size-fits-all thing, you are actually trying to clone your own self. It's about a small thing that you might have, and you're looking at 1,000, 5,000 clones of yourself, which is never possible, which cannot be possible. Which brings me to the second step that, okay, now that you've decided that you're going to take a certain module of a larger canvas in multiple settings, how do I set up systems that can actually work with me just looking at it from remote? That's the beauty of coming up with SOPs. SOPs that will define every facet of the organization. And mind you, this is social sector. This is not a sales marketing job where you can define that, okay, these are the targets, this is how you meet it, this is how you make your sales pitch and stuff like that. You are again dealing with human beings. You're dealing with communities. You're dealing with different castes, religions, sex, different expectations. This is human dealing. So obviously there's no question of a one-size-fits-all. So how do you adapt to local aspirations, adapt to local possibilities, local challenges, local opportunities, and put it all together so that you can make it happen. So again, it's about standard operating processes for HR, for opening up field offices, to hiring people, to the bank accounts, to we've got 21 SOPs in Magic Bus today, and the numbers keep growing. And because everywhere we open an office, I'm not there to teach. Kusum has a couple of territories under her. She's not there to train people there. But whoever is there knows that this is the SOPs. They'll come into Magic Bus, 5-day induction, and off you go and run your own thing. We'll just monitor by remote. Once a week, we'll have our weekly calls. Once a month, I'll do the calls or something like that. That's about it. And then you let go. You hand it over. You define the parameters for them. You trust them. You tell them, you're my lieutenant. You handle it. We will sink and swim because of you out there. Give them the responsibility. More often than not, they'll perform. We've not had a failure rate of more than 5% in our staff, ever in Magic Bus. And believe me, I'm talking about hundreds and hundreds of people that we kind of recruit. So that's kind of in a nutshell. Again, I'm trying to not oversimplify this whole thing. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears behind this as well. But just to give an overarching feel, it is about standardization with enough scope for localization. So standardizing within frameworks, but then the moment it gets literally transposed into a fresh location, there has to be enough scope for localization. Otherwise, you are alienating people. I can't have my Mumbai slum model in a Medak village or a Keonjhar tribal area. It doesn't work like that at all. Everything changes. Because we are talking about the social sector. This is not a product where the same machine can operate exactly like that in Mumbai and in Kolkata. It's not like that at all. Just like to stop here and invite questions at this point in time.
Your biggest failure at Magic Bus? What's been your biggest failure at Magic Bus? I know because failures you scrutinize more. If I ask you about success, it will be very easy. What's your biggest failure at Magic Bus?
It'll be difficult for me to give you one biggest failure. Biggest would mean just one. I can give you a whole list of them. There have been enormous number of failures in Magic Bus. Enormous numbers.
How have you dealt with it?
Okay, so I can pick up a section. I can pick up HR, finance, accounts, fundraising, communication, whatever I can give you. Okay, so just to, I know I didn't want to again overwhelm you, that's not the purpose here. So one of my biggest failures has been the ability to adapt my curriculum into various settings. So while I say I take my Mumbai curriculum and adapt to a different setting, it takes me about a 6 months to a 1 year lead time for the complete ethos to get adapted. It's a huge challenge for me because what happens is that when I transpose a curriculum, I kind of do a literal translation because a lot of translations happen either centrally or in the state headquarters. The translators of those curriculum can make a literal translation, but people down the line may not imbibe it in the way it has to be imbibed for my final message transaction to happen in the spirit in which the curriculum has been written. Now that's a gap which eventually gets filled up over a period of time. So I'm struggling to bridge that 6 months to 1 year lag time that I have over this. That is one of them. I won't call it a failure. It's a challenge. So I won't because these things we acknowledge immediately. We are right on top of it. We're trying to get the right people to make it happen. So today when we're working in 14 states, and by the next month we'll be in 17 or something like that, and every state which means a new language. But that's the peculiarity of India, and most of you would know that. Every state, new language, new this, new that, and we literally start from scratch. But having said that, there are still a few fundamentals that still remain the same. And as long as we know that, look, we failed in that particular territory because these were the issues of convergence that never really happened, or these were the socio-economic or the political or whatever, cultural issues that had to be taken into cognizance. We could not take care of then, and hence we kind of hit a roadblock. So it's just about being cognizant, telling our curriculum development experts to keep track of it closely. Yes, sir.
Have you found that just keeping your funders or being transparent with your funders has allowed you to get through those challenges or failures easier? Or have they in return put a lot of pressure on because there might have been lack of delivery? Or has transparency helped you along the way? And has ever a potential funder, shown, that they're not happy, when you have been transparent?
And this is again, the SOPs kind of have to be very clear. So everything from who sanctions your 10 rupee to the 500 to the 50,000 to your 500,000 rupee. Sanctioning authorities, approval authorities, checks and balances, how do you maintain vouchers? Nobody in Magic Bus can plead ignorance that I don't know about this because I've not been told about this. We do our best to get everybody up to speed in the very first week of their lives here. So that things like this, because at the end of the day, one slippage, the kind of damage control exercise that goes to the process of this damage control is so excruciating that we never want to get into this. And this has to be a part of the hygiene of the organization. There's no discussion on this. This is ingrained. This can never be compromised because we know. It's the same thing like my child protection policy. I work in communities in very, very sensitive areas. If there's one violation with one girl child somewhere, I'm going to be thrown out in no time. I'm going to lose my face in no time. And then to cultivate it all back is going to be such a pain that I don't know how long it's going to take. So why take the chance? So put the fear of the devil in the mind of my volunteer who signs up to my child protection policy, that you stand by it. You're the role model, you're the mentor, but you stand by it. And you'll be responsible for the consequences. Of course, in a nicer way. It's not about coercion. but the point is, discipline in an organization can never be intolerated. And especially if you're growing. The first instance of, if somebody gets to know that he's the boss's favorite, things start disintegrating. And that's not one thing that you can ever live with.
And also when you talk of transparency, in Magic Bus, that's something that we do right from the day we start designing a program. For us, a funder is a partner. We don't have a hierarchy with a funder. We sit on the table together and we discuss what is it that we are trying to achieve. At the very beginning, we do the risk analysis, we write down the risks and assumptions, and we know, both of us as partners, we know that things will go wrong because we are working in different scenarios. And when things go wrong, we are very open and transparent about sharing what has gone wrong. And if they are partners, they will understand, that okay, this has gone wrong. So how do we? What else do we do? I think we are one of the rare organizations in the country which have a lot of unutilized amount at the end of the year because we haven't been able to utilize due to different reasons. And we are very open with our funders in saying, sir, they haven't been able to utilize 20% or 30%. And because they know the process, they tell us, okay, take another 6 months and implement the program. So I think transparency and accountability are things that we cannot negotiate on as organizations because our accountability is to the people that we work with. So that's something that's a non-negotiable for everyone.
I just wanted to understand the relationship with the government, different ministries. For example, the sports and the education ministry. So how is the association with government and how government sees this? Because many times whenever we talk about public-private partnership, it is most of the time the other side going to the government and then a lot of struggle. So what is Magic Bus experience working with government?
It's a mixed bag. You can make out from my expression. It's a very mixed bag, despite my very good linkages with them, my lineage with a whole bunch of them. But this association is so personality driven that it's very difficult to give you a one size fit all answer. We have an MOU with the government of India. We have one with Mizoram, one with Jharkhand, a bit of an MOU with Rajasthan. We work very closely with Karnataka, Maharashtra, Andhra. Very close relations with them, different departments. But really, if you want an answer that am I very excited about it? Absolutely nothing. There's nothing to be excited about. It's a very tough ask. Bit by bit we keep eroding at the systems that are there. And then Sunil is smiling behind. I mean, we're working together in Rajasthan with 150 schools, and every day is a struggle. So there's a new government now. The BJP doesn't want us there, or something like that. I'm sure you figure that out now. So it is. Again, there's no one answer to this.
Also, the thing is, we know that government is an important stakeholder. We can't really ignore the government and work with corporate partners or in the communities, because they are the biggest grant makers, right? Like, they are the people, they are the body which has decided to make a difference. So the struggle still continues, right? And it's a relationship that's going to take time, because there are no existing systems and processes that say that, okay, once done for us.
Yes.
Meeting you and Sriram, it's not a question, but it is in my mind, a bit philosophical. It should not be a magic bus, it should be a real bus. It's not a magic bus, it's a real bus, because the credibility you are holding, the transparency you have, accountability you have, you know the work you are doing. Why it is being named as magic bus?
I will answer that.
It was magic bus even before we never had a...
I will answer that.
We have magic in us. The bus goes with
I'll
the
answer
effort.
that.
Yes.
I was part of Magic Bus before Prateek joined.
Really?
So yeah,
So I don't know,
2007 to 10, 1 year I think I was there. So when Matthew started this, so when he used to go in the communities and take the children in the bus and go for the camps outside Bombay, so all the kids used to say Jadoo ka bus aaya hai. For them it was magic, and that's how the name fell, Magic Bus.
No, like, I was looking at
Yeah, I could have given him the origin of the name though.
Yeah. No, but
Thank you so much.
that's why the name was.
Yes, it was. It was named by the kids. So, हमारे slums में जब this physical bus, and we've got 4 of them in Bombay. It goes into slums of Mumbai, picks up kids from various slums and takes them to a hired playfield, because Bombay doesn't have any kind of other space. And of course, those few hours that the kids are away from their ghetto-like existence, it's fairly magical for them. Hence the name Magic Bus, given to us by the children.
Right. So I have
Yes, Vishal.